education. 20 as a primary school, both as a primary school teacher and as a primary school principal, but working in a very disadvantaged school in Limerick. And then she came to Mary I and she got her PhD. So she's she's a primary school education or teacher. She's an academic, and she's also a community activist. And one of the, I suppose, driving forces behind TED has really been Anne's activism at the ground level. And that certainly, Tiernan and Tracy really mentioned that yesterday. So I thought it would be very nice to have her at the very end to tie up sort of at the teacher education section and what she has done to keep those some of those initiatives alive. Like for instance, Carmel mentioned yesterday about the literacy initiative, and after that, what occurred were communities of practice. So these were sustained, and they're being sustained because Anne and the people who work in TED have made sure that teachers have spaces to meet, and she's also been instrumental in setting up they mentioned this as well yesterday, the Ushkilt Networks, which is a facility for principals of DEIS schools to come together to, talk and share knowledge and share information. And Carmel did say this, that one of the big things in Limerick has been really the movement away from competitiveness between each other to really working together in partnership. And as somebody who works in Mary I, we're really proud that this small unit that really developed in an organic way has been fundamental in driving that partnership approach. So I don't want to hog the limelight anymore. So I cannot say enough about Anne. I mean, everyone, we have a committee, and there's never in Mary I, we're always trying to go around trying to find people to join committees, but Anne has never any problem getting people to sit in her committee because they all like to be involved and hear about the initiatives. Anyway, Anne, I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Angie. That's a very warm welcome this morning. I'm blushing here at the end of looking into the computer, so thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm delighted to be working with you this morning. Delighted you met my colleagues Carmel and Tiernan and Tracy, so they would have given some insight into the TED work. I have a PowerPoint presentation, but please stop me as I go if anything isn't clear or if you want more information, and I know we've time at the end as well. So I'd love if this was a dialogue, because I may say something that isn't very clear. So I'm delighted to be with you, and I suppose just to say it's a pleasure working with Angie. Angie is somebody I can always go to for a second opinion, for an honest opinion. She will always support the work we do, but she's just been a consistent champion of this work since I've known Angie. So, and I'm very, very grateful to her for that. So I'm going to share my screen now. And here we go.
Yeah, it's appearing, Anne.
Is it appearing?
Yes, it is, Anne.
Great, great. So I can no longer see you, but I can hear you. Can you see me still, Angie?
Yes, I can. Yeah, you're down the bottom.
Can see the screen. Okay,
yeah.
That's great. So my name is Anne Higgins. I am the coordinator of a project called TED, Transforming Education Through Dialogue. And my presentation this morning is called Reaching In and Reaching Out. So for the TED project, we like to believe, and we have strong evidence to support the fact that we reach into Mary Immaculate College to all the expertise and the goodwill and the commitment that is there to social justice, to working with children who deserve the very best in life in terms of supporting them to fill gaps. And then we reach out into DEIS schools and communities, and I'll explain what they are as we go. So just to keep that in mind, we reach in and we reach out. So our TED project is located in the Curriculum Development Unit. Eucharia McCarthy is the director of the Curriculum Development Unit, and her leadership and commitment to the TED project is phenomenal. And I have certainly learned a huge amount from her, and there's a huge amount of support. So a little bit of background. So the TED project was established in 1998. So as Angie said, before 1998, I was a teacher and a principal in a DESH school, and I'll explain about DESH in a minute. And that's a school that serves the needs of children who live with the challenges of poverty and marginalisation. So 1998, I started working 3 days a week for Mary Mackley College, and the person who subsequently became president, Pather, and he has since passed on, said to me, and go out and talk to the principals and ask them what they need. And so that was the starting point. It was always something that was going to be in dialogue, and it was always something that was going to respond to their needs. So we're in the curriculum development unit, and we have a management committee that Angie sits on. So the management committee is made up of people from the arts and education within the college, and we had an external member as well, Carmel O'Doherty, that you've met already. In terms of staffing, I'm the coordinator, and I'm a full-time worker now, and we also have one full-time project worker, Ruth Burke. But we have additional projects time to time, and we have at the moment, which I'll explain later, and we recruit people specifically for those projects. Our funding comes through Mary Mackley College for our two positions, the two full-time positions, and then we make funding submissions to develop initiatives and projects, and then that allows us to employ some more people. So the mission statement of Mary Mackley College and the mission statement of TED, it's, I suppose, scaffolds or frames or supports the work we do. So in terms of Mary Mackley College, the mission statement says that the college seeks to foster in its students a spirit of justice and compassion in the service of others. We try to respect cultural diversity, and it serves to promote equality in society and provide an environment where all have freedom and opportunity to achieve their full potential. So the college mission statement, as you can see, speaks to the agenda of social justice, and we believe that the TED project very much sits under the umbrella of social justice. So in the TED project then, our own mission statement is that TED seeks to improve and enhance educational outcomes for children. And this is achieved through harnessing the expertise of Mary Mackley College, so reaching in the service of children and parents and teachers, primarily in DESH contexts, and through dialogue and collaboration, that's us reaching out, we seek to unlock the enormous potential within the learning communities. So that's what's framing the work we do and driving it. So just to tell you, you'll hear me now and again talk about the DESH school. So DESH is an Irish word, DEIS. It means opportunity. And DEIS stands for Delivering Equality of Opportunity in Schools. So schools that serve the needs of children living with the challenges of poverty and marginalisation, they would be designated DESH schools, and through the government Department of Education, they would be awarded particular supports to support their children. The schools we work with are DESH Band 1 schools. So there's a banding system, Band 1 and 2. They're DESH Band 1 schools, which is the highest concentration of disadvantage, where there are more complex needs, a greater prevalence of children from traveller background and special educational needs. So those children, their families and their communities are the people we work with. So in terms of current partnerships and initiatives, and I'll speak to each one of these as I go through it. So we have networks, and I know Tracy and Tiernan would have spoke about the networks, and I'll speak about them again in a little while. But basically, the first network began in 1998. That was a Plus network, and that's still going. The Uskil network then is a network of principals of DESH schools, primary and secondary in Limerick City, and that began about 14 years ago. And the Curlacala one is also about 20 years old. We have a Mary Mackley College Children's Choir. So Dr. Alva Kenny, who works in our Department of Arts and Education, and she's a specialist in music, and she came up with this idea and worked with us to offer children in our schools the opportunity to be involved in a choir. So it's a very exciting initiative, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. The League of Legends soccer tournament, where children come on campus into Mary I for a soccer tournament. A Studio Classroom Art and Research Initiative, where children are involved in our schools working with an artist, both in the classroom and virtually. The Lego Education Initiative, that is with our Plus schools, and one of our lecturers, Rory McGann, who works in ICT digital learning, reaches out with his students, and this is around coding and computer skills to work with the children in the DEIS schools. A big project we have at the moment is Embracing Diversity, Nurturing Integration, Learning for Life, and this is a project that is in response to the needs of schools to support children from very diverse backgrounds, because in Ireland there is a significant increase in diversity over the past 5 to 10 years. We have a TEAL, TEAL, English as an additional language project that grew out of the Embracing Diversity project, and we also send our students specifically in placement to DEIS schools. So moving on. The networks of schools. So the Oscailt network, this is formed. The membership are the principals of the DEIS Band 1 primary and post-primary schools in Limerick City. A number of years ago, the Department of Education have a sub-office in Limerick City, and Limerick was designated a regeneration area. And it was designated a regeneration area because of the level of crime, the level of poverty, the level of marginalisation in the city. A report was done and a regeneration project was set up. As part of that, Limerick Department of Education in Limerick were able to draw down dormant accounts funding. So they drew down dormant accounts funding, and with this money, one of the recommendations in the Fitzgerald report was that schools needed to be more accessible to their communities. So this money allowed schools, we had 22 schools at the time, primary and secondary DEIS schools, and this supported schools to maximise the use of their facilities for the community. So how did Mary I get involved in that? So the Department of Education and the inspectors invited me to come along to have a discussion around how we might be able to support it. So I agreed that I would facilitate the group of schools with the Department of Education for the lifetime of this funding, and that this funding would support the schools, and they did wonderful, wonderful things. So they had a grant that to buy equipment, to make to put in lighting, to allow caretakers to work in the evening time, to bring in different kinds of programs for the children, and I facilitated the network, so it allowed them to share information across the schools. It allowed them to identify best practice, and when the money was all gone, after about 2.5 or 3 years, they found that these were all principals, that working together was such an exciting and useful and important part of their work, that it offered them huge support to in order that they could support each other, a great place to share ideas, a great place to bring concerns, that they wanted the network actually to continue even though the money was gone. And this was not an expected outcome, but it was a very important outcome. And so the initiative is still alive. The Oscailt network is still alive, and a lot of other things have grown out of that since, including the EdNIP project, which I'll talk about in a little while. So that network of principals is a very exciting and a very powerful place where there's a huge trust and huge respect, and it's a privilege really to facilitate it and to be part of it. The Plus network is the original network, and that stands for Primary Liaison with University Services. So that's a network where the principals don't attend, but maybe the homeschool liaison teacher in the school attends, or a different vice principal may attend. And that's a very practical network where we look at supporting the schools in very practical ways. We organise different speakers for school staffs as well as for the network itself, workshops for the school staffs as well as the network itself. And we would also, the EdNIP project is also part of that, but so are some of the other initiatives like the League of Legends, the soccer tournament, the art project, and the choir. And then the Curlacala is not located in Limerick City. It is as old as the Plus network, almost. And it's a bit different because they are located in the centre of Ireland, and we would meet less frequently. And that's a different type of network again, where the principals come together to share concerns, to receive training, to share good practice. and to reflect on changes in education. So they would meet less frequently, maybe 5 times a year, but still a very, very powerful network. I'll move on unless there are any questions on the networks. Okay, so let me go on to the Embracing Diversity, Nurturing Integration project. So where did this idea develop from? It came from the Plus and USCL networks. So basically, traditionally in Ireland, I think, and you would agree with me, we would typically be, and the statistics that are there to show, we'd be typically, largely, traditionally a Catholic country, and we would not have had great diversity within our own population, apart from, I suppose, our own internal ethnic group of travellers. But in more recent years, we have people coming to live in Ireland from all over the world in significant numbers. And in our DEIS schools in Limerick, in 5 schools in particular, there's quite a number, as you'll see, of children from very diverse backgrounds. And while the schools hugely welcome them and have very, very positive around this development and excited about it, they also recognise the need for support, because they were not the children that they were normally teaching, if you like. They were not the Irish children. So these were a new group of children, and they wanted to make sure that they were meeting those children's needs and that they were supporting the integration of those children. So that discussion took place at the USCL network and at the Plus network, and I was facilitating the USCL network, and we talked deeply about I suppose, the opportunities and the challenges that were there. And the project really acknowledges the changing cultural diversity in the DEIS schools and communities in Limerick, and it also recognises the current humanitarian crisis linked to migration and the rise of racism, which we've seen in the past few days in Europe, fear and terrorism, and it acknowledges the part that schools can play in nurturing each and every child to build a just society where all children can flourish. So that's our rationale. So the key important. Please, Angie.
No, just going back to that. And isn't it fair to say, though, that the DEIS schools, with the newly arriving children, say from Syria and from because they're the students or children that came into Limerick City and Pakistan and Afghanistan, that it was to the DEIS schools that they were in, the majority were enrolled, and that's why this was more of a concern for DEIS schools than it was maybe for non-DEIS. Or am I?
Yeah, I think from those countries, certainly, I think that, they came into the DEIS schools. Now, I would know, that there's a large population living, in the Quays in Limerick, and I see them going across the bridge in the morning to another school just over the over Shannon Bridge, that school there, Angie. So they would have a diverse population. Now, I don't know their percentage, but certainly children from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Syria, from war-torn countries, quite a lot of them came to our DEIS schools. And also the reason for that is our DEIS schools are centrally located in the city, and a lot of the accommodation that they were accessing were apartments, some of them not very good apartments, in the centre of the city.
Right.
And the welcome was there for them in DEIS schools.
Yeah.
So I think that's
okay.
Also
thanks, Anne.
Yeah, and also DEIS schools.
I'm sorry, but Angie, there's a question.
Oh, sorry.
That was, and I think it's absolutely regarded and connected to what you are just talking. So,
do we understand well that DEIS schools are in some sense spontaneously segregating schools, specialised schools in deeply disadvantaged areas, almost 100% disadvantaged student population? I think what has happened with DEIS, and we can have this conversation between ourselves, but I don't think they're segregation by they're a deliberate segregation. I think the schools are located in disadvantaged areas. It is important to emphasize that not all children attending DEIS schools are disadvantaged. And maybe one of the problems that we have in Ireland is that we have a lot of disadvantaged children who are attending non-DEIS schools as well. It's just that the DEIS schools are located in very, very disadvantaged areas. And the parents and the family, there would be a much more profound complexity of needs. So you would have parents with literacy issues, etc. It certainly would be less so in non-DEIS schools. Now, are children stigmatized by going to a DEIS school or a non-DEIS? I don't think that's the case, and I think the children from DEIS schools, in terms of their progression into post-primary and into higher education, has really increased. And we at higher education, or at third level, we have now, or the government have initiatives in place that target specifically children from DEIS areas. Now, at the same time, we're like any other country. The higher the child's socioeconomic background, the more likely they are to go into higher education. Some of DEIS schools would be rural schools. And isn't there some DEIS Band 1 schools located in rural areas that wouldn't necessarily be? Are they all DEIS?
There are DEIS schools in rural areas as well, and rural, I suppose, to use the word that none of us like, disadvantage is different, I suppose, to the urban setting where there's the greater concentration living in the same geographical area. But Angie is right when she says that not all children attending DEIS schools are from a DEIS background, but the significant majority would be, but there's certainly a mix. And also children from that DEIS context would go to schools that are not DEIS schools, and they would not have the supports, that are within a DEIS school. And sometimes they might go to a DEIS primary school and go on to a secondary school that is not a DEIS secondary school.
Yeah.
So there isn't, a law that children have to go to a school within their local area or anything like that. Parents do have a choice in one sense, but if you don't have the money for transport or whatever, you might not be able to send your child to a different school across the city. But I wouldn't see it as segregation. I would see, in fact, that DEIS schools are popular with the community because they work so hard for the children. And I think DEIS schools that I know of have a fabulous relationship with their communities and with their parents, and very high aspirations for their children.
Yeah, I'd agree entirely with that, Anne. And I think going to a DEIS school does not, you don't have a stigma. There is no stigma that you carry that carries with you by going to a DEIS school. In the end, it's your retention in education. Now, it just says, Ludmila asked the question, how is it with children from other countries? If the child speaks English, it can go to a non-DEIS school. Yeah, there's nothing stopping any parent from going to a non-DEIS school. Generally, if you're in a local area, you'll go to that local school because it is good practice. If you're living in Myross, that you go to Myross school, because that's where the children in your locality, or where the children in the local areas is they're all there, and they're your friends, etc. But if you want to come into town, you can certainly do that as well. And it also depends on if there are, if a school is not oversubscribed. If it's oversubscribed, then, Tracy did mention this yesterday, that a school may have to imply a selection criteria. For instance, if there's siblings already in the school, those sorts of things. If the parent is a teacher, is another indicator, those sort of things. And I'm not. Is there anything else?
No, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. So that basically, there's. Yeah, I think the point we'd like to make is it's
no
not
law.
No, and it's not segregation.
No, certainly not.
I mean, DEIS schools wouldn't be seen as dumping grounds. And in fact, I think is it Tiernan that mentioned yesterday, because the supports are so good in DEIS schools, that you have children, particularly children with special education needs, coming, driving 20 kilometers to a school. I know in a school, somebody from about 50 miles used to drive into Limerick City every day because the services were there in that particular school. So I hope we've answered your question.
Okay, will I move
Okay,
on?
and yeah, that's perfect, Anne.
Okay, so I suppose for that project, we were recognising the key importance of schools and the role the school can play in answering the need to create awareness and nurture empathy and solidarity so that all children and their families might live in respect. And for many families, and I've learned this through the EdNIP project, we did baseline research at the start. We did research throughout, and I'm writing up the final report now. And very often the school is the first societal institution a family comes in contact with. So that relationship with the school is critically important, and the role the school can play in helping the family to integrate into society is critically important. So we didn't, we had this discussion at the Oscailt Network. We sought funding and were successful, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But we were very conscious we were building on the school's experiences and expertise to date. So we weren't inventing integration. We were building on the good practices that were already there and walking that journey of integration with the schools and the families. So across the 5 primary schools self-selected to become involved. And at that time, at the beginning of the project, there were 995 children from 40 countries of origin, speaking 26 languages and practicing 17 religions. And across the 5 primary schools, there were 131 staff. So our funding came from a budget. We had 400,000. We raised money through AMIF, the Asylum Migration Integration Fund. In order for them to come up with 300,000, we had to raise 100,000, which we were able to do through a trust in Limerick, and once we raised that, then we could apply for the 300,000. Unfortunately, we weren't so lucky. The second time round, we applied and we weren't successful. But the funder again had given us 100,000 and allowed us to keep that money to continue the EdNIP project, even in I suppose, less intensive EdNIP project, if you like, for a period of time. They're just the names of the schools that were involved in Limerick City. And then the partners are also important. So we had a project steering committee and we had the principals of the 5 schools. I facilitated it. And we had the Department of Education and Skills, Limerick and Clare Education and Training Board, the City and County Council, and TUSLA Education Welfare Services. So these are all organisations that care deeply and have responsibility around the quality of children's lives. And they send representatives to sit on the steering committee. So what did we do? We conducted baseline research and ongoing research to learn what the schools were doing from the start, to learn what their needs were, to identify the training needs of teachers, to identify how best to progress. And one of the really important things we did successfully, I'm happy to say, is in each school we established a school integration committee, and we had 1 full-time project leader for the EdNIP project and 2 part-time workers. So one of them always sat on the school integration committee, and within a school you would have teachers, parents, you may have children, you may have the principal, there may be a public health nurse. So the different schools, I suppose, configured their school integration committees differently depending on availability, but they all had them and they met regularly every month, and they looked at what was happening in the school, what was happening in other schools, and what they'd like to see happen. And we also then brought those school integration committees together for a community of practice where they shared the successes and the challenges across the 5 schools. So that was the membership sharing it, but on a monthly basis we had a project management committee that I've just described to you, the membership, and they shared the successes and the challenges as well. So we developed project actions in consultation with the school integration committees, and we had to report on a quarterly basis to the Asylum Migration Integration Fund. So what did the programme look like? It looked different in each of the 5 schools, and the reason it did was while it was one project under one umbrella, there was a bespoke programme for each school so that each school was doing what it needed to do. It wasn't prescriptive. There was a menu which we drew up together, and people identified and prioritised what their needs were. So within the class provision, so during class time, the EdNIP team, as I said, there was one full-time worker and two part-time workers. They actually delivered in-class programs to children on topics like racism and stereotyping and identity. And they had fabulous workshops with the children. And these are very sensitive things for children to discuss and to, for adults even sometimes, to discuss and to come to terms with. But our findings, and we did the research with the children afterwards, was once you create a safe space and support them to have the language to discuss it, they were really up for it. The kids were well able to talk about issues like racism and bullying and stereotyping and identity. And, you know, and these are children from diverse backgrounds, talking about the need for us to have these conversations so that these kinds of issues can be addressed. So also within Mary Immaculate College, our students have options to specialise in particular areas. So one is the DICE elective, and that stands for Development and Intercultural Education. And the DICE students used a resource called Journeys that's written by one of our colleagues, Breed Golden, and Aideen Roach. It's called Journeys, and they used that as the basis for their work with the children. And it looks at the issue of migration. That's on our website, and I'll give you details later on. And then there's a DESH initiative that's works with students who choose that as theirs, and they also went on placement within our EdNIP schools. And then there's a group, because religious diversity is very new to us, if you like, and would be new to some of the teachers. So within our area, there's a group called the Midwest Interfaith Group, which represents, you know, a number of different faiths. And they went to schools and did cafe-style workshops with children and with school staff as well. And they were very, very well received. So that's the in-class type of provision. After-school provision included after school time, that at 3 o'clock when the school was over, that we organised family visits to local museums, to parks, and we did historical walks. And we learned before we set up EdNIP and while we were running it, the great thing was with the EdNIP staff and sometimes myself, we were part of the classes with parents and that, and we learned in a deep way how different needs that they identified. And we learned, you know, that sometimes when a migrant family comes to a city, they may go from, particularly the women, I think, may go from home to the school, to the shop, but not really explore the city. And we met people who didn't realise that we have a major historical castle within walking distance of you know, within the city, within walking distance of where they lived, and we have museums. So we thought this is a wonderful opportunity to create a greater understanding and familiarity with the city. And as family groups, it was lovely to do it as well. So the parent would meet with the child after school, and they would meet us at the museum, or we would meet them at the school and walk with them as far as the museum or the park or wherever it was, and just opened up those kinds of possibilities. Other possibilities were opportunities provided within Mary Immaculate College, where families came on a Saturday and did art and music workshops, and they came at night and did coding workshops, computer coding workshops with children. We organised buses from schools. The parent initiatives then, so our design was layered so that we worked with the teachers, we worked with the children in school time, we worked with the children after school time, we worked with the parents, and we also work with them in family groups. So the parent initiatives included English as an additional language classes, working with the ETB, one of our partners. We were able to put classes for parents into schools where they hadn't been before. We set up a conversation class because the adults told us that the classes were great, but they needed opportunities to practice speaking English. So we had, and I was lucky enough to be part of that. And that was great. That was really great. Whereas in small groups of 5 or 6, we worked together. We brought in sports clubs to have a coffee morning within the school so that the parents, Irish parents, all parents could have the opportunity to learn what kind of opportunities were out there and what kind of opportunities they might open for their children. One of the things we learned before we set up the project, and was certainly confirmed during the project, was the need to support a parent, typically a mother, who was at home with a young child, and until that child was 3, they would go to a preschool when they were 3. But that mother, we learned, could be quite isolated at home with her child. And the child could be isolated also. And there, in the research that I've done, I've learned that, you know, that has repercussions really. And the parent and toddler group ran in one of the schools every Tuesday morning, and it was a huge success, and it was a wonderful to be part of it, where parents and kids from Irish parents and parents who had come to live in Ireland sat on the floor with their children and played and had a cup of tea and, you know, practiced their English and shared stories. So that was and made friends, and their friendships continued outside the group. And there was certainly a breakdown in isolation. A parents' choir developed in one of the schools, and we also had family walks. So we had developed also whole school activities where they had a winter party. One of the schools ran a winter party and not just a Christmas party, so that lots of different traditions were represented. An interfaith world cafe, a one dish day where people from different nationalities brought different traditional meals, and that was a wonderful day to visit. I was very well fed, and we organised a mobile farm to come to the schools as well, and this was very interesting actually. So a truck came with different kinds of animals into the schoolyard, and class by class the children came to visit the farm. And what we learned from that, and we knew it, but you know, we learned it in a more profound way, I think, is that some of the children had come from very rural backgrounds in Afghanistan or Pakistan or Syria or wherever, and now they were seeing farm animals that they might not have seen maybe for 2 years, and the children were hugely excited. Again, making that connection, and it evoked, and it was again in some of the trips, which I'll describe in a little while, it evoked memories for them that were very positive. We did school staff continual professional development. We ran summer schools for 2 years, and we did ongoing continual professional development for teachers as well in areas they identified, including English as an additional language. We both bought and developed resources for schools. So if they identified something, a very practical example was we developed banners for each school that had welcome in all those languages. We developed school booklets, welcome booklets in multiple languages for each school. So it would have, the first half of it would have information about the school, about, you know, the time the school opened and closed, and the holidays, the names of the teachers, all kinds of important information. And then the second half of the booklet would have information about Limerick City. They're just two examples of what we developed. And then we also bought an awful lot of resources for English as an additional language, for dual language, intercultural, interfaith resources. And then we, as I said, as it went, we did research. So just to give you an idea of the summer trips in 2019, in that summer, we had families from 27 countries, which was 427 people. We did multiple trips. We went to farms, the seaside, places of historical interest, 155 adults, 272 children, a total of 115 families. So we had families from Angola, Afghanistan, Algeria, Brazil, Cameroon, Congo, Germany, Guinea, Sudan, Syria, Somalia, Ukraine, Venezuela, Yemen, Ireland, India, Ivory Coast, Iraq, Italy, Kenya, Latvia, Libya, Lithuania, Morocco, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Poland. So that's the extent of that. And the next slide shows you just over the 2 years, the numbers of opportunities across all those various initiatives that were availed of. So 8,183 opportunities were availed of by children, 2,674 by parents, and 827 of school staff. So as you can see, it was very busy, very diverse. It was layered and woven and interwoven, because we had webs of experience. You know, within a family, you could have a mother attending an English class. You have a child, you know, doing sessions on racism in school. Then you had the whole family group together going to an art class or whatever. So we touched lives in I think very profound ways, including mine. This is an example of some of the booklets that we developed for the schools. And this is our banner in multiple languages, including Irish and English, telling them that they are welcome to each school, and these hang within the school and also hang at school gates. So for Mary I's role, I suppose, in all of this was we were the lead organisation. We listened to the needs, we sourced the money, we developed and designed the project. Our students, our DEIS students and our DICE students were in placement within the schools. And various colleagues that I've named there worked in different ways to develop workshops for the schools, sometimes for the children, sometimes for the teachers. And then we have huge support from our research and graduate school, from the education office, from HR and the finance office. So I'd be strongly saying that having the TED project within Mary Immaculate College provides the TED project with huge scaffolding and support in terms of financial management, in terms of guidance, in terms of help with putting grants together. So am I okay to move on to the next project?
And that's fine, I think.
Okay, great. So basically then out of that grew the need to support children for whom English is an additional language, and to support those teachers. So basically TED, Teal evolved as a sister project to EdNIP. It was identified through discussions with the DEIS principals. So we have 8 schools, 6 primary and 2 post-primary, self-selected again to be part of it. So we upskilled teachers and created a shared space to build expertise across and within schools, bringing knowledge, resources, hands-on expertise. We raised enough money to release one of our own staff, Dr. Fiona Gardner-Hyland, to work with the schools, and we just won a European language label through the European Commission, and that's in the orange dress there in the centre there. That is our colleague Fiona, who leads this project. So one of the other projects we're involved with is called City Connects. It's developed by Boston College, and it addresses out-of-school issues affecting a child's ability to thrive. This initiative in Boston College is an evidence-based approach to improving student outcomes. It's 20 years old. It would be within DEIS settings, I suppose, corresponding in the US. It's a system of student support which leverages existing school and community resources in order to improve students' academic and social and emotional outcomes. It is school-based. They have coordinators who cultivate partnerships with community agencies, and they collaborate closely with families and facilities across support. So where's Mary I's engagement in this? So Mary I is the lead implementation partner in Ireland. And this is work I'm very involved in at the moment. So we brought City Connects to the attention of the Department of Education, and we participated then in a subsequent trip to Boston, a study trip with Irish government departments. There's ongoing collaboration with the Department of Education and Skills and other government departments. It's been piloted in the Northeast Inner City in Dublin, and we sit on the steering committee, the in-school groups, the implementation group, and we facilitate the principals network. So that's just another example of something that's growing. So to move quickly, then on to other kinds of work we do. So I described the networks, and the League of Legends initiative. Our children from the DEIS schools come and play a soccer tournament in Mary I. Our children from the DEIS schools come to Mary I and are involved in an arts initiative that is also reaches into their schools. They're involved in a choir. Then we reach out and work with the schools in very practical ways in interventions like the EdNIP project. But we also do research specifically to support DEIS schools and communities. So just a very quick overview. The EdNIP research report is in process. I'm writing it at the moment. A bit about the Bedford Row Family Project. I think Tracy may have mentioned she's chair of the Bedford Row Family Project, and that's a project that supports prisoners, families of prisoners and ex-prisoners. And they approached us and asked us if we would be willing to do some research with them. So Ruth and I undertook to do that research, and it's called, I'll just go into the next slide for a second, and you'll see the cover of the report on your left. It's called Holding the Suffering. So it deepened our understanding for sure of the challenges that children from families of prisoners live with and how schools might support them. So we went into the Bedford Row project, and it was like an ethnographic type case study. We spent time with them there. We interviewed people who had been prisoners, families of prisoners. We interviewed children. We spent time understanding how their project grew and developed, and we, because it had grown organically, we did a literature review and mapped it against best practice and made recommendations to them for the future. So that was a really positive and exciting collaboration with the Bedford Row project. So basically there I have shown you a list of resources and reports that we've done, all of which are available through our website or through the Curriculum Development Unit. On the fifth one down, I wrote a report with another colleague on the Dormant Accounts funded scheme. That was the start of the Oscailt network. So that showed how the money was used and what schools did and what the outcomes were. And underneath that, how our kids is a very important piece of research that was done, and I was one of the researchers along with another colleague, Des McCafferty, and with Eileen Humphreys, looking at the quality of children's lives across the city, a comparative study looking at children's lives in DEIS contexts and in other contexts. So you can see all of those reports on our website, but that just gives you an overview of the kinds of research that we have done, which is all of which is designed to work in partnership with our schools and communities. And this last one here is the Dormant Accounts one, and that talks about the impact of schools being able to make their facilities available to the community, and it very much celebrates the creativity and the compassion and the commitment of schools to do that. So what are the key takeaways? In working for us as a college, reaching out to schools and bringing our schools in, like for Tracy or Tiernan to come in and work with our students, that's critical to the work we do, this partnership work. So we do it, key takeaways is we work in consultation, listening to the needs and working together to identify solutions. So we never go and tell a group of schools, what you need is, what you need is to work on your integration. What you need is to work on your English as an additional language. No, we listen through the networks. I would also do a lot of work, in consultation, say with Tiernan in my Ross, I would, work with the community in my Ross and listen carefully to what their needs are. Our management model, it's what steers the ship. We make decisions like who needs to be around the table and who are the champions who will carry this project. So when we're developing like the EdNIP project, the principals needed to be around that table making decisions. We needed to be around the table, I suppose giving direction and bringing the knowledge that we bring. But there were other services as well, like the education boards, who needed to be around the table. Our intervention model, then we look at how we plan programs and interventions, and there's always a research arm to what we do so that we learn from existing research and we contribute to it. And we also have to ask the hard question, where's the money going to come from? It's great to have the ideas, but as we all know, money is hard won, and there's a lot of work that goes into fundraising. So I suppose, I did some training years back with the Interactive Institute for Social Change, and this is one of my takeaways that I tried to live with all these years. What builds success, or what builds sustainability? And this just speaks to our philosophy, really. If we put all our thought and energy into what the outcomes are going to be, you might get the outcomes, but will you have sustainability? Will you build long-time success? So the theory behind this is we have to have a vision and we have to work towards the outcomes, but we have to pay attention to the process by which decisions are made and things are done and partnerships are built, and we have to pay attention to relationships also, so that the relationships and the process and the outcomes are balanced, and if you put a pin in the middle of that triangle so that you could spin it, not every day will everything be in balance, but over time, because if we hadn't paid attention to relationships and process 22 years ago when the TED project started, I don't think it would exist now, because the relationships build trust, and when you build trust, you get buy-in, but you also get, I think, success and sustainability. So our contact details then are at the end there, and you will see that there is a TED website where you will get more information. So thank you so much for listening. And I'm very happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.